A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Matthew. The 11 disciples went to Galilee, to the mountain to which Jesus had ordered them. When they all saw him, they worshipped, but they doubted. Then Jesus approached and said to them, "All power in heaven and on earth have been given to me. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all that I have commanded you. And behold, I am with you always until the end of the age." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus.
A lot of priests say this is the hardest Sunday of the year to preach on, Trinity Sunday. Tried to find some jokes on the internet about 3 and 1 and 1 and 3 and the Trinity, but nothing was appropriate. But I think all of us have learned through our religious education, whether in religion classes here or in Catholic schools, that we believe in one God, but this one God is three persons. So if you're anything like me, this was something that I sort of just stored away in the back of my mind as something to know for the quiz or the test, but never really gave too much more thought to it. Because the Trinitarian doctrine became, sort of just a fact to know and to memorize so I could, put it down on the test. Trinity is 3 and 1 and so on and so forth. Why? I have no idea. I had no idea. I even remember that if anyone were to question the doctrine further, the nun that I had in class would say, "It's a mystery. Sit down. Don't ask any more questions." And because, she didn't know exactly what to say anyway, either, how to explain it to kids. So perhaps your religious education class on the Trinity was similar to that. But what's important to note is that when the church deems something a mystery, it's not in the sense of what we ordinarily think as of a mystery. It's not like a crime scene or a puzzle that needs to be pieced together. We don't need to uncover more clues, a whole bunch of clues, to piece the mystery together and therefore to gain a complete, understandable picture of the Trinity. Rather, the mysteries of the church are born not from a lack of evidence or knowledge, but really an overflow of experiences and teachings that are handed down through the years. Mysteries like the Trinity have in them so much depth and so much insight that we can really only scratch the surface of their beauty and their depth. And so perhaps a fitting analogy for a mystery is the example of, a human person, any one of us. So here's an example. I have a priest friend who I've known for 48 years, since we were in college together, and then we went off to different seminaries. He's the pastor of St. Joseph's Church in Kingston, New York, which is in the Archdiocese, and he's a great parish priest, a wonderful pastor. We're about 6 days apart in age. I know him very well. We usually get together for cycling and for dinner every 3 or 4 months. But after all these years, he's still a mystery to me. Although I know a lot about him, I continue to learn more and more. And so at this particular moment, what I don't understand about him is that he wants to leave parish work and join a Trappist monastery in Iowa. Cardinal Dolan, his boss, wants him to stay, but he can't forbid him to leave because it's considered a higher calling. I want him to stay too because I think we need more priests in parishes than we do in monasteries. I've known him for 48 years, and he's still a mystery to me. So it's not just God who is a mystery. We are we are mysteries to each other. I know married couples who have been married for more than 50 years who basically say the same thing. It's not that they don't know each other very well, but there's this incomprehensible depth that makes up each person, so much so that even 50 years together doesn't fully illuminate the entirety of the person. And despite the mystery and the unknown in the relationship, couples still continue to love each other as fully as possible. Perhaps that's why in this gospel we just heard, the apostles bent down to worship, although they didn't fully understand what had happened to Jesus. They worshipped, but they questioned, they doubted. So what is there to learn from the Trinity? Why does it matter that we believe in a triune God? Is it just an abstract theological truth that we're told to believe in? Does it have any bearing in our lives? Well, I think it's important first to know that nothing that the church teaches is meant to make the faith more complicated. Each teaching, each mystery of the church is meant to illuminate a truth, not only about God, but about ourselves. Because we're made in the image and likeness of God, everything that gives us a better understanding of God also gives us a better understanding of ourselves and our relationships. Entering deeper into the mystery of God, the Trinitarian God, is meant to affect and influence all that we think about, all that we do as members of God's church, baptized in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. If we understand who God is then, we will respond as best we can with love and become more like God, who is love. So what we see in the Trinity are three distinct persons in one God. And, just like in marriage, when two become one flesh, each distinct person in the Trinity is so intimately united in love with the others, they become one. In marriage, each person ideally tries their best so that they give themselves completely to the other while also receiving the love of the other person completely. In the Trinity, then, so we have this perfect manifestation of love. This love is so intense and so great that the love can't be merely contained between the members of the Trinity. And so, like the Trinitarian God, our love shouldn't be contained within ourselves. Real love is supposed to be shared with the people that we love the most, with the community, with the church, with the world, as best we can. So the Feast of the Holy Trinity really calls us to try to imitate the love of God as revealed in the Trinity in our own lives. And today, this gospel passage, I think, gives us a way to incorporate that and think about it. So the passage is the last couple of lines of Matthew's gospel, and it portrays the 11, the post-resurrection group of disciples, as a broken community. They're coming together. Jesus is risen from the dead, but they're not comprehending that. They're a broken community who waver between worship and doubt. Worship and doubt. That's a description that also can describe me many times, maybe yourselves, maybe all of us. Worship, wavering between worship and doubt and questions and wonderment. And so the Trinity is really, wonderment about, not just about God, not just about ourselves, mystery to ourselves, but just wondering about life in general. And so the disciples, what they do is they followed the instructions of their companions, and interestingly, their companions were the women, who don't get much press in the Bible, the women who had been told by both the angel at the tomb and by Jesus himself where the Lord wanted to meet them, on this mountain in Galilee. So when they meet the risen Christ, he explained what the resurrection meant by saying that all power in heaven and on earth were his. He was victorious, and if they believed him and in his promise that to remain with them always, they would believe that no evil can overcome him or them. Little wonder that the disciples both worship and doubt. Believing in Jesus implies that we must also believe in the mystery of ourselves. They had to believe in the mystery of themselves as the 11 initial disciples to go out there. So the risen Lord believes in these disciples enough to hand on his mission, telling them to make their faith contagious and to spread the good news of the triune God, not as a complicated dogma, but in the form of a vibrant and attractive love and hope, which are the only powers capable really of transforming ordinary people into other Christians. So what happened? Well, the wavering disciples who gathered on that mountain did go out. They did go out to preach, and that made it possible for them to let their faith overcome their doubts and their fears and their struggles. They had to sort of invent how they were going to carry forth Jesus' message when he was no longer with them. And so it was only through this process that they could discover how he was with them, always in other and more universal ways. On Friday, I had a funeral here, and I used this particular gospel to try to encourage and to convince the many grandchildren of the decedent of the message that their faith-filled 92-year-old greatest generation grandmother was giving to them. So this would have been her first Sunday in heaven. I used this gospel, and basically I said, maybe your grandma is saying, just what Jesus is saying, because she was a very faithful person who came here every week, and maybe your grandmother is saying to you, go into the world, do what I did, make your lives and your faith attractive to others, and know that I'm going to be with you always. And also know, as Jesus says, I'll be watching over you. My mother used to say, before she passed away, when I croak, I'm going to be looking down on you. I'm going to be haunting you if you're not doing what I told you to do. So the message of the gospel continues from one generation to the next, from the greatest generation in this case to a new generation. And so we don't understand everything about God or about ourselves or about life. But like the apostles, we just go forward trusting that there is a plan, trusting that God is with us, trusting that we are called to remember, as Moses talks about in the first reading, remember that we've been created in the image of God and that we have been liberated. Maybe the confluence of Trinity Sunday and Memorial Day is meant to be this year. We should very much so enjoy the holiday, but live our lives worthy of the many sacrifices that made this holiday possible. And I think that's why another connection to Moses, he tells the people of that generation 3,500 years ago that they should gratefully remember God's works of creation and liberation, bringing them out of the slavery of Egypt into the promised land. And so on Memorial Day, we remember the many people who served in the battles of war for our country, who were willing to sacrifice their lives for an idea, the idea of freedom. Likewise, the apostles, the disciples, the thousands and thousands of martyrs and so many others who sacrificed their lives for the idea, the message, the good news of the gospel, and this mysterious notion of this triune God who loves us, who is with us, even though we don't understand everything about God. And so although we may not be able to concretely explain the mystery of God, the process of being disciples and missionaries is what allows our triune God to live in us and to work through us. So as we come together and celebrate Trinity Sunday today, let us go forth from here and by the example, by the witness of what we have received from in the past that brings us to Mass today, that we too will go and observe all that we have been commanded to do, knowing that the Lord is with us to the end of the age.